Hello everybody and welcome! Today I'm going to show you how I design boss fights for my indie game and explain what makes a boss great. So let's get right to it. Hollow Knight. Probably the best Metroidvania game out there. It stands out mostly because of the design, music, and map. But I think what most stands out of this game are the boss fights. Exploring what makes Hollow Knight's battles so fluid and fun to play, to me, is a secret of making an excellent boss fight. On a smaller scale, I'm going to try to apply this formula to a very important battle in my game. This is Delta's Discs, an indie Metroidvania game I've been working on for a very long time. It tells the story of this duck who has lost his memories and is adventuring the world to collect his music discs that can remind him of who he is. And as you can see, there are many boss fights in this game, but today we're going to be working on a different one. Now, the battle I'll be designing is this one, where Delta, the player, has to defeat this army of squirrels to save the prison rats. But the real boss fight begins when this buff squirrel knight enters the scene. So, when designing boss fights, we usually work with a state machine, where we change between enemy states that includes an idle, a chasing, attacking, and a defeat. So to start, I downloaded all the sprites and animations of every state, which were all made by a good friend of mine who does all the sprite sheets for the game. And as per usual, I always design a boss starting from his attacks, and analyze the animations. We have the total of 2. The first one being a normal sword slash, and the second being a sword stab on the floor. So now, let's make them work. Now, during boss fights, we usually have a variation of main attacks and defense attacks. I consider main attacks those that the player must focus on not getting hit, making the enemy hard to hit and is somewhat unique for the boss. To better understand this concept, if we take a look at the false knight from Hollow Knight, his main attack isn't him jumping towards the player or hitting the floor. That's too common. It's something that most enemies already do. In reality, the main attack is when he smashes the floor like a lunatic, causing...
What the hell is even that?
Notice that the player's focus is on getting away from the boss, while also dodging these projectiles. You also can't hit the boss, and it's probably the hardest attack from this fight. But most importantly, it's memorable. It makes this boss stand out, and it's exactly what we're looking for. So here we are in Godot, which by the way is a great engine.
Oh my PC!
And here's the Dark Knight, which for now only has an idle animation and can walk around. And after some brainstorming, I think the best attack for this boss should be a huge shockwave caused from him stabbing the floor. It isn't the most impressive attack, but it is hard to dodge. It keeps the player away from the boss, and it is pretty unique from the other enemies from the game. There's also the slash attack, which I will categorize it as a defense attack. It's used when the player is too close or damaging the boss a lot. It basically just swings the sword towards the player. There's nothing much to say about it. So now that we have all the attacks ready, it's time for the most important part for boss designs, which is teaching the enemy when to attack, dodge, and approach the player, which is all controlled by an enemy AI. So at the beginning of the video, I talked a little bit about state machines, which is what decides the actions the enemy will take. But besides that, we also use sensors to detect things like the player position, walls, or the floor, for example, to determine the right action at the right time. So let me break it down to you. The default state, which is normally the idle mode for the boss, is where he just waits for something to happen. If the player enters the scene or he detects it, he goes to the approach state, which is basically him tracking the player's position and moving towards him. During the approach state, we have multiple collision detectors that, if activated, enter the attack state, and after done attacking, he goes right back to the approach state. Well, that was pretty simple, right? Absolutely not, because we need to make this boss smart. If you were to look at other games, most of the bosses have a very important trait in common. They keep their distance from the player. You can't have a boss that corners you to a wall, especially when you can't jump over them, and you can't keep them too close or else he will get spammed hit to death. In cases like these, the boss must be able to jump, attack, or just retreat. That's good battle design, and is exactly why the Dark Knight jumps and has close and long range attacks. But most importantly, during the approach state, he never follows the player to a wall. In cases where the player is getting too close, he attacks instead of approaching, and that gives him the opportunity of getting away from the boss, making the fight much more enjoyable. Other than that, These fights need to have a gradual increase of difficulty. Depending on the boss's health, there is normally an increase in speed or the activation of certain attacks, like shooting more projectiles or attack combinations. But if you finally manage to kill them, we enter the last state, which is death. He just dies. No comment. And that, guys, wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video. If you did, do consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video.